Next up is Heidi Kalbe from Germany. Heidi, are you there?
Yes, hi, I'm there.
Sweet. I just checked the time. It's not even 6 a.m. in Germany, so thanks for joining.
That's
that
true,
early.
yes. As you can see, it's very dark outside, so yeah.
when I presented 2 years ago, I was in Germany at the time, and I think it was around the same time. So yeah, it's dedication, so that's great. Thank you.
All right.
Heidi is a business intelligence consultant with the Information Lab Deutschland. And when she first got in touch with Tableau as a software developer 2 years ago, she knew that this was the tool for her. And she wanted to bring her passion for company-wide analytics culture to others. So that's when she decided to start with the Information Lab. Since then, she has brought that enthusiasm to numerous projects and to trainings for over 250 new and experienced Tableau users. And apparently she's a bit of an alpaca fan, because that's the only thing she loves more than Tableau. So with that introduction, I'll hand it over to you and let you tell us about Marimekko.
All right, thank you, perfect. So, marriage in and of itself is a beautiful thing. Two vibrant souls, each bright and significant and valuable in their own right, are joined to create a whole that is so much greater than the sum of its parts. Unfortunately, that is all I can tell you about marriage. Marimekkos, however, are also beautiful. They combine two useful and valuable aspects into a whole, into a bigger picture. Same as any marriage, they may appear a little complicated from the outside, but once you understand the intricacies and inner workings, Marimekko charts are pretty easy to understand. Now, sadly, I cannot tell you the secret to a perfect marriage, but I can tell you the secret to a perfect Marimekko chart. Marimekko is a Finnish lifestyle design company which was founded in 1951. It is especially known for its brightly colored and patterned prints. If you've ever seen photos of Jackie Kennedy in the 1960s when she was campaigning for her husband's presidential elections, chances are that you've seen her in a Marimekko dress. What about the chart type though? Marimekko charts display a curious pattern of rectangles of varying sizes, and they can also be brightly colored, same as the patterns, as this particular chart shows. But why should you use this chart? How can you build it in Tableau? Are there any mistakes you should avoid? And if matters should get boring, could you spice things up a bit? All of this will be discussed in my talk today. First up, why should you ever use a Marimekko chart in the first place? Well, Marimekko charts help us gauge the effects of a Simpson's paradox. This phenomenon describes a trend appearing in the high-level aggregation of data, but then disappearing or even reversing when looking at subgroups of data, or vice versa. This is also known as the Joule-Simpson effect or the reversal paradox. I'll give you an example to make this clearer to you. Let's take a look at the success of different kidney stone procedures. When we look at the different sizes of kidney stones, large and small, we can easily see that the more complex procedure, the open surgery, is more successful than the easier procedure. But when we look at the overall success of those two treatments, we can see that the percutaneous nephrolithotomy is more successful overall. So why does this trend reverse now? That's because we are neglecting the weight of the different groups. So if we size the pies depending on how many cases we have in each group, we can see that most cases are in the group of large kidney stones removed by surgery and small stones removed by nephrolithotomy. By putting more weight on the less successful group for surgeries and on the more successful group for nephrolithotomies, we change the overall success rate, and the pattern is reversed to the pattern shown by size of the stones. However, all of this is difficult to show in pie charts, and showing this many pie charts to compare is bad practice anyway. So it would be better to use bar charts instead. But then again, we lose the weight of the sample size. the aim here would be to have the height of the bars show the percentage within each group, which these bars already do, but then also have the width of the bars show the absolute weight of that group within the whole data set. And that is exactly what a Marimekko chart does. It combines relative and absolute values, thus showing a more holistic picture by displaying the weight within groups and the weight of the different groups in the whole data set. Now, how can we build a Marimekko chart? There's a wonderful blog post by Zen Master Jonathan Drummey, which I will show at the end. And I've broken it down into 5 rather simple steps. So we first need to choose the structure, then set the height within the bars, set the width of the bars, arrange everything, and add a header. First up, choose the structure. What do I mean with that? By choosing the structure, I mean that you need to find out which dimensions you want to use to break down your data and in which hierarchy you want to use them. So you can do anything starting from 2 dimensions, such as looking at page visits per weekday and hour, but you can also go nuts and take 6 dimensions or more if you like. I would not suggest using more than 3 dimensions because, as you can see, going up to 6 dimensions just creates a train wreck of a Marimekko chart, and it looks more like a kind of skyline chart, maybe we could call it. So to properly show the Simpsons paradox, it makes the most sense to actually use 3 dimensions. So that's what I'm going to use for the next, for the following explanation. So once you have your 3 dimensions nailed down, I would suggest you create a table. That is something you will never hear me say otherwise, but for Marimekkos, it does make sense to first create your table. Choose your dimensions and choose in which order you want to use your dimensions, and also choose the measure that you are going to use. The order of the dimensions is important because you want to go from high level down to the deep dive. I've numbered them the other way around, so you can see my innermost dimension is now called dimension 1. That is the dimension that will create your stacked elements within a single bar. And then all the other dimensions, dimensions 2, 3, up to 17 or 93 if you want to, they will create the individual bars. Now that we have our structure, we can set the height within the bars. And for that, we basically need a percent of total table calculation, and we want to compute using the innermost dimension. So we create a percent of total for our measure along the dimension 1, our innermost dimension, the one that makes our bars stacked. After that, we can set the width of the bars. And for that, we want to calculate the sum of whatever measure we chose, but then we want to ignore our innermost dimension. And as you've probably guessed, we simply create a simple LOD statement because we want to exclude our innermost dimension, in this case, the dimension 1, and then we want to sum up whichever measure we chose. I call this one measure per bar, so that's what I'm going to refer to as for the rest of this talk. Now that we have the width per bar, we also need to find out where these bars will be situated. And for that, we want to accumulate this width that we just calculated. So we want to sum it up, have the running sum, and as you've probably guessed, that's another table calculation. We want to take the measure per bar, calculate the running sum, and we want to compute that along specific dimensions. And now we're going downwards. So we go from our highest dimension, in this case dimension 3, down to dimension 2, and we do not want to compute along our innermost dimension. So that's very important here. And then we can arrange everything. We now have our dimensions, which will split everything into stacked bars. So those will go to detail, and we start that from left to right. We also have the height of our bars. So this will create our vertical axis, and thus it will go to rows. The measure per bar creates the width of our bars. So of course that will go to size. And this last one, that's the horizontal position of our bars. So that's going to go on our horizontal axis. That means it goes to columns. What will that look like? So this is going to be your view when you have your table. You drag your dimensions one by one from left to right to detail. You drag off your measure names. We don't need those anymore. We put the percent of total calculation to rows, the running sum of the width to columns, and the original width to size. Then it will look something like this. Now, of course, you don't want a scatter plot, you want a bar chart. So you change the marks type to bars. You also change the size to fixed and choose the alignment to be right aligned. And what I personally like to do is I usually change the two bottom dimensions to color so that you have a two stacked color legend. And then we're going to have something looking like this. And we're getting a lot closer. We just need to clean everything up a little. So you can sort your innermost dimension now in case it's not in the order that you want it to be in. You can clean up your labels and you fix and hide your axes. I usually fix the y-axis, so the vertical axis, to 100%, and I fix my horizontal axis to the overall sum of my measure, and then hide them, of course. And then you will end up with a Marimekko chart looking like this. Now, a color legend would easily help us distinguish between the innermost and the second from innermost dimensions. But as we have three dimensions here, we can't really tell which is which class in this case. So it would be super helpful to have a header. And for the header, we need another little chart. The header in itself is basically just a stacked bar. So you drag your outermost dimension, in this case dimension 3, to label. You sort it in the opposite way to how you sort it in your Marimekko chart to have it stacked correctly. And you drag your measure to columns. The rest, again, is cleanup. You fix and hide your axes. You maximize the size, or that's what I do, and you choose an appropriate color for your header. And then you just add it to your dashboard, and there we go. So 5 easy steps. Choose your structure, choose which dimensions you want and in which order. Set the height within the bars with a simple percent of total calculation. Set the width of the bars using an exclude statement and a running sum on top of that. Arrange everything, clean up your dashboard, and add a little header. Now, are there any limitations or mistakes you should avoid? In fact, yes, there are. So we are currently limited in that Tableau does not support horizontal bars at the moment. So we can't create something like this. The issue is that Tableau defaults when you use a bar marks type. It defaults to vertical bars as soon as you have 2 axes, so you can't control that. Maybe that will change at some point, maybe it won't. Either way will be fine. Please, this should go without saying, but please don't use negative figures. That just would completely mess up your percent of total calculation, and it wouldn't make sense to use this in a Marimekko chart. The only case where I would say it's okay to use negative figures is if you want to make this kind of diverging Marimekko chart, and for that you would need an if statement around your percent of total calculation. But again, this one has underlying only positive figures, so please just don't use negative figures in general. Also, subdimensions with different attributes in the superior dimensions don't really make any sense to use. What do I mean by that? You all probably know the superstore, and you know that every subcategory exists only once. So we have different subcategories within each category. And this just doesn't really make a lot of sense, because the aim of the Marimekko is to compare the same attribute in different groups. So using something like this really isn't helpful and not the best use case for a Marimekko. So make sure that your innermost dimension has the same attributes in different groups. Also, please don't use too many bars. We already looked at this train wreck of a Marimekko chart earlier, and it's just super hard to compare the width of the individual bars. Also, we don't know which is which region, segment, category, year of order. So that is not super helpful. So, but also, in addition to not using too many individual bars, don't use too many stacked elements. So don't have too many attributes in your innermost dimensions, such as I did here. Best practice would be to have only 2 elements in your innermost dimension, or to have 3 at the very most. Now, you may say a Marimekko chart is all well and good, but can we spice things up a little? Yeah, sure. My personal go-to spice are marginal histograms. So I like to use them both vertically and horizontally, as you can see in this chart, or you can even combine them with a heat grid, which may be easier to gauge for some users who are not used to Marimekko charts yet. Or you can even do both. Have your Marimekko, have your heat grid in the corner, and then have horizontal and vertical marginal histograms. Now, what you should have learned today, you now know the value of bringing 2 unique views on data together to create a bigger picture. And you understand the added value of marrying both percentages and absolute values over leaving them separate. You know how to build a successful Marimekko chart, you know which mistakes to avoid to make it last, and you know how to spice things up when you are in danger of being bored. There's a couple of articles I would like to recommend where you can learn more if you're interested. So the first one I already mentioned in the beginning is by Jonathan Drummey. It's an excellent step-by-step explanation of how to build a Marimekko chart and also an explanation of the Simpsons paradox. If any German speakers are listening, feel free to check out my German explanation, which I wrote for the Information Lab Germany. Lindsay Batzendahl recently published a brilliant take on why Marimekkos are helpful or not so much. And Steve Wexler also has a fabulous post on which chart types you could experiment with instead of using the Marimekko. Now, if you need advice on your marriage, I'm probably not the person to go to, but if you ever have any questions on Marimekko charts, feel free to reach out via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and feel free to check out my Tableau public profile to see what I have done with Marimekko charts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I think that was quite interesting. I'll definitely know about Marimekko charts, but I never really use them, mostly because I just don't think that they could be an option. So that's a good reminder. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. One of my questions would be, do you run into problems that people don't understand it, and how do you explain it to them? Because it does look like a rather unusual chart.
Yes, absolutely. So I must admit they are rarely used in a business context. It's rare that I actually see them at clients, but we do use them for our internal reporting. And you do have to explain them at the first time, but then afterwards they're basically just weird bar charts, and everybody understands bar charts. So it takes a little bit of an explanation, but after that people just take off running and they're very good at understanding them.
And do you have problems like training people or teaching people how to use them and when to use them? Like, is there confusion around when it actually makes sense and when you should just go with normal bars, for example?
No, I think people understand it, but they don't really have the confidence to use it, because understanding is one thing, but then explaining it to other colleagues is a different thing. So I think they just shy away from that a little bit.
Cool. Fee asked, what's one of the most interesting things that it helped you to discover?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think it really helps to show that when you have very few values in one particular year, for example, when you look over the years, and then it looks as though you have like 25 to 75%, but in fact it's really just 3 items that you had in there. that's very important to see in the Marimekko because the bar just grows slimmer. And that's something that I find most important to show.
Cool, thank you. Are there any other questions from our audience? It doesn't look like it. Well, thanks so much for dialing in that early. We really appreciate it. And I think it was a great introduction into Marimekko charts.